Where is she?
I don't know where she is.
Where is Savannah?
No. Where did you go with her? I know you're not that cruel inside. I'm begging you, Lee. Just tell us.
I don't know where she is.
In the quiet streets of El Paso, Texas, a young man named Lee Rodarte was about to begin a descent into a darkness that would shock an entire community. He was not your typical criminal. Lee Rodarte was intelligent, calculating, and, as investigators would soon discover, dangerously methodical. Yet, despite his cunning, the walls of the law would eventually close in, and justice would prevail. Though not without struggle. It all began in the early 2000s, when the city was startled by a string of violent incidents. At first, they appeared isolated, random senseless acts with no apparent connection. But as the details emerged, a pattern began to form, one that pointed directly to a mind far sharper than the ordinary criminal. Lee Rodarte was not born a monster. Friends described him as quiet, intelligent, someone who blended in, someone who could charm when necessary, but remained fundamentally detached. That detachment would serve him well in his crimes. Authorities would later describe him as manipulative, someone who could read people, anticipate reactions, and exploit weaknesses. In short, he was smarter than the detectives chasing him, but smarter did not mean unstoppable. The first crime that brought Rodarte to the attention of law enforcement involved the murder of an acquaintance. A young man whose life ended in a violent, calculated attack? What baffled detectives was not just the crime itself, but the meticulousness with which it was executed. There was no chaos, no fingerprints left behind, no immediate evidence linking the act to anyone. For weeks, investigators struggled. Rodarte seemed always one step ahead. He knew what questions would be asked, what evidence could betray him, and he meticulously avoided leaving a trace. But intelligence, no matter how keen, is not a shield against human error. And in Rodarte's case, that error would come from his own ego, his belief that he was untouchable. For weeks, investigators struggled. Rodarte seemed always one step ahead. He knew what questions would be asked, what evidence could betray him, and he meticulously avoided leaving a trace. But intelligence, no matter how keen, is not a shield against human error. And in Rodarte's case, that error would come from his own ego, his belief that he was untouchable. Detectives interviewed witnesses, piecing together fragments of information. Each conversation revealed Rodarte's careful planning and his unusual ability to manipulate situations. Neighbors recalled seeing him in places he claimed never to have been. Friends remembered his calm demeanor, even when discussing events that would disturb most people. But these observations, while telling, were circumstantial. They needed proof. As the investigation deepened, law enforcement began to notice a troubling pattern. Rodarte had a specific method, always choosing victims who could not easily defend themselves, always planning his moves with military precision. Yet, despite his intelligence, Rodarte displayed subtle mistakes. Small details, overlooked in his confidence, started to form a trail, and this trail would eventually lead investigators to the truth. One of the key breakthroughs came from forensic evidence. DNA, once an afterthought in the early days of the case, became the cornerstone of the investigation. Rodarte, in his meticulous planning, had overlooked one simple fact. Every human being leaves a trace, and with modern forensic science, even the smallest trace could become a weapon of justice. With mounting evidence, detectives began to construct a profile, one that would describe not just the actions of a killer, but the mind behind them. Behavioral experts were brought in to understand his psychology, how a young man, intelligent and seemingly ordinary, could commit acts of such calculated violence. The profile painted Rodarte as manipulative, narcissistic, and remorseless, a man who viewed life as a chessboard, each human merely a piece to move or discard. Rodarte, however, continued his activities with an almost audacious confidence. Law enforcement would later reflect that he underestimated the persistence of the police, believing that his intelligence would allow him to evade capture indefinitely. But intelligence can be a double-edged sword. His careful planning, when combined with his arrogance, created opportunities for detectives to exploit. The turning point in the investigation came when law enforcement linked Rodarte to a critical piece of evidence left at one of the crime scenes. It was a small detail easily overlooked by anyone but a meticulous team of detectives. That tiny mistake unraveled the network of lies and deceptions Rodarte had spun. Through tireless investigation, surveillance, and forensic analysis, detectives finally closed in. The moment of arrest was tense, a culmination of months of work, where every lead, every observation, every subtle clue converged. Rodarte, taken into custody, maintained his composure, but the net had closed. In interviews, Rodarte remained calm, almost detached. Yet, his expressions betrayed a flicker of recognition, the understanding that even the most brilliant mind is not invincible against the relentless pursuit of justice. The trial that followed was closely watched, both by the local community and national media. Prosecutors presented the overwhelming evidence collected over months: DNA, witness testimony, and the meticulous reconstruction of Rodarte's actions. Defense attorneys argued for leniency, citing his intelligence, upbringing, and the potential for rehabilitation. But the crimes were too calculated, too devastating to ignore. In the end, the jury deliberated and returned a verdict that reflected both the severity of the crimes and the meticulous planning behind them. Guilty on multiple counts. Lee Rodarte was sentenced to life imprisonment, ensuring that he would never again pose a threat to society. The case of Lee Rodarte remains a chilling reminder that intelligence alone cannot shield someone from accountability. It serves as a case study for law enforcement, for behavioral analysts, and for anyone who believes that cunning can outpace justice indefinitely. Rodarte's story is not just one of crime, it is a story of persistence, of the painstaking work of detectives, and of the inevitable triumph of law over deception. As the years pass, the victims' memories remain, a testament to lives cut short by calculation and cruelty. But justice, though delayed, was ultimately delivered, and in that delivery, the community found a measure of closure, a reminder that even the smartest among us cannot escape the consequences of their actions.